At the height of House Targaryen's power, 17 dragons were alive in Westeros. 17. No army in the world could stand against even one. By the time the civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons was over, most of them were dead. What followed was an age without dragons. An age that lasted nearly 200 years, all the way to Daenerys Targaryen. This is the story of every dragon that flew, fought, and fell, ranked by size, power, and the brutal fate that ended them. We start small, because even the smallest dragon in this war was still capable of killing hundreds of men. Arrax, Tyraxes, Vermax, and Stormcloud were young dragons, barely grown, ridden by Rhaenyra's sons. They were fast and agile, but dangerously outmatched when the war escalated. Arrax was the first to fall, torn apart by Vhagar above the sea of Shipbreaker Bay in what witnesses called the most one-sided dragon duel in history. A whale eaten by a whale the size of a mountain. Tyraxes met an even worse end, killed in the chaos of the storming of the dragon pit, surrounded by a mob of thousands who had decided that if dragons were the weapons of kings, then the dragons had to die. Of the smaller dragons, Moondancer deserves a moment alone. Pale green, swift, and barely the size of a large horse, she was ridden by Baela Targaryen, a teenage girl who had never fought a dragon battle in her life. When Vhagar, the largest dragon in the world, came to burn Dragonstone, Baela didn't run. She launched Moondancer directly at the monster. The battle lasted less than a minute. Moondancer was destroyed. But in those seconds, she managed to claw Vhagar's wing and burn her rider badly enough that Vhagar crashed, and Baela survived the fall. A dragon the size of a dog who fought the size of a legend. The middle rank of dragons were no less deadly, just less famous. Seasmoke was a pale, silver-grey dragon, graceful in the air, fiercely loyal to his first rider, Laenor Velaryon. When Laenor disappeared, Seasmoke refused new riders for years, something dragons almost never do. He eventually accepted a new bond and fought at the Battle of the Gullet, one of the war's bloodiest naval engagements. Dreamfire was pale blue and silver, ridden by the gentle Helaena Targaryen. When Helaena died in grief, Dreamfire felt it, and went berserk inside the dragon pit, cracking the very dome of the structure with her tail before the mob finally brought her down. Tessarion, the cobalt blue dragon, called the Blue Queen, was perhaps the most elegant flyer of the war, ridden by the young Prince Daeron. She fought in the south of Westeros, while the main war raged in the north, and her fate was sealed not by an enemy dragon, but by the collapse of the cause she fought for. Now we enter the tier of dragons that could level castles. Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, was once ridden by the old king, Jaehaerys I, the greatest Targaryen who ever lived. After Jaehaerys died, Vermithor sat riderless in a cave on Dragonstone for decades, growing older and larger and more dangerous with every passing year. He was the second largest dragon alive during the dance. His mate, Silverwing, pale as moonlight, once ridden by the beloved Queen Alysanne, waited with him. When Rhaenyra's side desperately needed more dragon riders, two men, Hugh Hammer and Ulf White, both rumoured to carry Targaryen blood, managed to claim Vermithor and Silverwing, respectively. These weren't trained knights. They were small folk, and suddenly they were riding the most powerful weapons in Westeros. It did not end well for anyone. Meleys, the Red Queen, was arguably the most dangerous dragon in a straight fight, pound for pound. Scarlet-scaled with pink wing membranes, she was called the fastest dragon alive. Her rider was Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, a woman who had been denied the Iron Throne her entire life, and who rode Meleys with the fury of every injustice she had ever swallowed. At the Battle of Rook's Rest, Rhaenys discovered a trap, too late. Waiting for her were not one but two dragons, Vhagar and Sunfire together. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. Meleys tore chunks from Sunfire before Vhagar's weight finally brought her down. Rhaenys died with her dragon, still fighting. The Red Queen fell like a comet, and the war changed the moment she hit the ground. If Meleys was the most dangerous, Sunfire was the most beautiful. Gold and shimmering, described in the histories as looking like a living piece of sunlight, he was ridden by King Aegon II himself. But beauty did not protect him from war. At Rook's Rest, Meleys mauled him badly enough that he couldn't fly properly for months. He was later wounded again at the Battle of Dragonstone. By the end of the war, Sunfire was a broken thing, one wing dragging, wounds that wouldn't heal. A dragon that had once gleamed like a god, reduced to dragging himself across the ground. He had won every fight he'd ever been in, and still the war destroyed him. If you asked any soldier in this war which dragon they least wanted to face, most would say Caraxes, the bloodworm. He was long and lean where other dragons were massive, a serpentine monster with an unusually elongated neck, too many teeth, and a shriek that soldiers said could make men void their bowels before the fire even arrived. He moved like a snake and fought like a demon. His rider was Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, the most dangerous man in Westeros. And together they were something the histories struggle to describe. At the battle above the God's Eye, the final battle of the dance, Caraxes collided with Vhagar herself in mid-air. Both dragons hit the lake. Caraxes, mortally wounded, somehow dragged himself out of the water, crawled to the shore, and died there. It took Vhagar to kill him, and even then he made her pay. And then there is Vhagar. There are no words adequate for Vhagar. She was one of the 3 dragons that conquered Westeros under Aegon I, alongside Balerion, the Black Dread, and Meraxes. By the time of the dance, Balerion and Meraxes were long dead. Vhagar alone had survived into the age of civil war, and she had kept growing. A single one of her scales was the size of a castle door. A single breath could melt the gate of a fortress. Riderless for years after her previous rider died, she was claimed by Aemond Targaryen, a cold, brilliant, one-eyed prince with something to prove. Vhagar won every engagement of the war. She killed Meleys. She destroyed Arrax. She ended Moondancer. At the battle above the God's Eye, Caraxes locked onto her throat, and they fell together into the lake. Vhagar drowned. But even dead at the bottom of a lake, she is, by the histories, the largest creature that ever existed in the known world. When the dance of the dragons ended, so did the age of dragons. Of the 17 that had flown at the war's start, only a handful remained, wounded, riderless, and dying. The ones that survived had no riders left to bond with. Without the bond, dragons do not thrive. They grow smaller, sicker. In the generations that followed, the last dragons shrank to the size of cats, and then to nothing. By the time Daenerys Targaryen was born, 2 centuries later, the Targaryens had forgotten what it meant to ride. The dance didn't just kill dragons. It killed the Targaryen dynasty's greatest power, and with it, their claim to be something more than men. The question that hangs over every season of House of the Dragon is a simple one. Was any throne worth this